Hello, everyone. Bonjour, tout le monde. Thank you so much for your care and understanding as we are just a couple minutes late in starting today's webinar. We had a couple of those wonderful technical pieces that came up today. And so thank you again for your care and your kindness. And I hope you took a moment to pause as we were just working through some of those details. Welcome to the Accelerating Your Impact and Data webinar. My name is Tracy Vavrick, and I'm the Director of Learning and Network Engagements for Community Foundations of Canada. And it is so wonderful to have all of you here.
I was wondering if you should stop it.
Oh, so we're just going to, yeah, thank you. I'm coming to you from Calgary, Alberta, Treaty 7 territory on the traditional lands of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda Nation, and Métis Nation. I am grateful to work, live, and learn on the traditional territory of Treaty 7, and I'm continuing to learn more about how I can be a better friend to the Indigenous communities. I am committed to the hard part of learning and understanding and moving into reconciliation. Again, welcome. And before we dive into our session, I just would like to go over a few housekeeping details. Just a friendly Zoom reminder, we are using meeting mode today, and so we can see and hear you, and you can see and hear us. So please use the mute button during our presentation. If you have questions throughout the session, please pop them in the chat box, and we'll be incorporating and collecting your questions for a short Q&A at the end. And for the best experience, please close all other applications and use speaker view on Zoom. And I encourage you to turn your computer volume up. Today, we are joined by E.C. Pollock from Foundant. Now, many of you are familiar with Foundant. There's many foundations from coast to coast to coast that are utilizing Foundant within their organizations. And we're honored with the partnership that we host with Foundant. Foundant is a company specializing in providing technological solutions for nonprofit organizations with the goal of facilitating their daily activities to give you more room to focus on your mission. EC is a support consultant with Foundant and has been working in the philanthropic field for most of her life. EC is joining us from York, Pennsylvania, and has spent time as a grant writer, fundraiser at the York County Library System, and as a program officer for the York County Community Foundation before joining the Foundant team in 2018. But EC's passion is helping nonprofits and foundations better access social change for more vibrant communities. EC, I am absolutely honored to now share the screen with you and to pass today's session over to you. Welcome.
Fabulous. Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? Get some nods or some thumbs. I see nods, I see thumbs. Excellent. Wonderful. Welcome, everybody. I recognize a couple of you, a couple of names on this call, so that's exciting. Thank you, Tracy, for that wonderful introduction. Yeah, my name's E.C. Pollock Burns. I've been at Foundant. It'll be 4 years in 2 weeks, which is insane. It's the longest I've ever held a job in my life. I typically am a jumper. I jump from nonprofit to nonprofit, but I just really have found a home here at Foundant, and I absolutely love it. So I'm honored today to be able to be here and be able to speak to you a little bit about data. I'm a little bit of a self-proclaimed data nerd, as I call myself. And I love it. I love everything about data. I think it tells us a lot what we need to know about our communities, about our lives, about our work, about the things we're doing. So it's really great. Let me go ahead and pull up our slides here. Give me 1 second here. Current slide, there we go. Sorry, PowerPoint always likes to change on me every 5 seconds, and it goes through the whole, are you sure you want to do this? And I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty sure I want to do this. So give me 1 second here to pull that up. All righty. Can everybody see that? Let's see from current slide here. Is that, is it showing presentation mode or is it showing what you all need to see?
I think it's showing speaker mode, so it's showing you the next slide and notes as well.
Okay. Sorry, I'm unprepared for this. It normally does it differently with Zoom. Maybe on slideshow. One sec as we troubleshoot here. Apologize, everybody.
AC, we so understand. We had a few bumps as we were starting to too as well. So we're mindful that things change and move. And we also have a really amazing group that's with us today. So I know they're
Wonderful.
yes.
Yeah, it's that kind of Tuesday. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your grace. Let's see, display settings. Display. Oh, there we go. I think we did it. All right, let's try this. Let's go with this. How about that? How's that look, everybody? Does that look
Beautiful.
better?
Beautiful.
Wonderful. Okay. Good. Just took us a bit to get warmed up. Okay. All right, everyone. Well, welcome again. Appreciate y'all being here. Yeah, so I've been in the data space of a pretty long time. I've been doing data presentations with Foundant for a long time. As Tracy mentioned, my new role now is actually support consultant here at Foundant Technologies, which is lovely. I get to work with many clients across all of our products. Mostly I'm on the GLM SLM side on the Foundant house. So if you are a Foundant client, that stands for Grant Lifecycle Manager and Scholarship Lifecycle Manager. So I do want to just start and caveat here saying a lot of things I'm going to be talking about today as far as data, due diligence, stewardship to our data. It is likely going to skew more on the grant making community investment side of the house, just because that's what I'm most familiar with. That's what I've worked with most of my adult life and what I'm working with now. However, if you're in a different department, you're in operations, you're in marketing, you're in fundraising, a lot of these key takeaways are going to apply to you too, but maybe just in a different way. So I encourage, a lot of the examples I'm going to give are likely going to, again, skew more on the grant side of the house, but I encourage you to kind of take a lot of these teachings and apply it to your own role and your own work, because I do really feel like it's applicable across the foundation space. So just wanted to kind of give that caveat just here in the beginning here. Okay, so we're going to start really high level. We're going to just start with data. What is it? Where do we find it? What do we do with it? And we are going to apply that funder lens on things, and we're going to drill deeper into that specifically. But it's hard to talk about something without first defining what we're talking about, right? So we're going to start there. So really, data. What is it, and where do we get it? Biggest thing I like to tell people is you've got 5 senses as a human. It's part of the human condition. Go ahead and use them. So when people say to me that, oh, well, the only place I can get data from a funder is from an LOI or an application, I say, that's not true. That's not true. So really, there's a lot of different ways that you can intake data. And I think it's important we just start with that, right? We've got direct observation that deals with the senses that I just discussed. There's this idea of surveys, which kind of comprise census and samples. We'll talk about them in just a little bit, but I did want to just spend some time, just because I'd be remiss if I didn't speak about just this idea of qualitative versus quantitative data. We are going to dive into this a little bit more later on in the presentation, but again, I think it's important we talk about it now so that we're defining what it means. Qualitative data talks about a quality. It describes something. It can be aspirational. It can be a story. It can be something that talks about feelings and different things that describe something that is an output, something that comes from something. So qualitative has its place. Quantitative is, I feel like we deal with more in the funder land, where it is a number. There is something that if you give money to one organization and you give money to another organization, there's a direct comparison there where we can compare apples to apples because there's numbers there. There's numbers served. There's again, it deals mostly with numbers. Is really what I guess I'm trying to get at. Now, both have value in understanding your work and how you do your work and how effective your work is, but they're very different. And I think it's worth acknowledging that. One of my first webinars I did with Foundant, I was actually a client. This was about 6 years ago. And I had I was a client and I dealt with numbers. I talked quantitative. There was another client from Ohio and she convinced her board, numbers don't tell our story. We need to tell stories. We're going to talk impact stories. We're going to talk about kids that have been affected by, I believe it was like an oral healthcare dental kind of organization, a funding organization. And they just decided that, you know what, we don't need to say we serve 3,000 kids. We need to say little Timmy has a full row of teeth and he can eat apples now, and he wasn't able to eat healthy 5 years ago. And that was important to them. So again, I think it's important to acknowledge that both have their place in how we're looking at data and how we're consuming data as far as the efficacy of our work and what we do. Okay. Again, we'll get to survey in just a minute, but the other thing I just wanted to mention is you likely might even use the same data, but just across qualitative and quantitative. For example, your marketing and fundraising staff will likely love collecting that qualitative data storytelling, right? They might need that for donor stewardship. They might need that for an annual reports impact story. While you, as maybe somebody more on the grant side of the house, might be more interested in the quantitative information so that you can report back to your board how that fits into your focus areas and what headway you're making in your community in the areas that you choose. Okay. All right, so next, I kind of want to go over just the last couple of bullets here, the survey and the census and the sample. Surveys, I just think it's important to understand that there can be different modalities of surveys and how you're collecting information. For example, census versus sample is a good place to start. We could, again, really drill down here and get into the nitty gritty, although I don't think that's why all of you registered for this webinar. So I don't think we'll go so much into that. But just as a kind of quick example here, a census is in theory counting everyone. It's in theory more accurate because you're counting everybody and you're surveying their opinions with everybody. It often is more expensive versus a sample, which is potentially is easier because you're just dealing with a sample of your larger representation. However, you're also assuming that this group is representative of all, which maybe is not so accurate, right? So it's important to note it might not be you collecting this data from whatever role you hold at the foundation, but it may inform the questions that you ask your grantees or your operational practices about how you're collecting this data and what that means for the overall kind of scale of what you're doing. And so again, I think it's important to just keep those things in mind in the broad sense as you kind of assess the work that you're doing. Okay. All right. There we go. All right, so now where can we collect data? Again, we're going to kind of switch more to the funding lens specifically here. Again, we're going to take it less broad and all this kind of where is data, all this good stuff in the ether. We're going to kind of drill down here more on the funding side of the house. Again, I want to bust the myth that the only place that you can collect data from nonprofits is from an application form. That is not true. It is not true at all. So the very first thing I wanted just to mention is that your individual and organizational relationship that you have with your nonprofits is one of your greatest gifts, okay? You might know about past grant history. I joked about this all the time at my old foundation. My controller has been there 30 years. She knows every single grant that has gone out into my community. So when I was confused about something, I was not sure about something, she was on the finance side, but she knew every single grant that has gone out because she personally cut those checks. So that's important. Those are data points. Those are data points that you have at your disposal, is people and their relationships and understanding with their past relationships with those nonprofits. It also comes down to your personal relationships with those nonprofits. My mother was an executive director of one of the largest food banks in York City for 12 years, right? I happen to know the food landscape in York County, Pennsylvania because of my mother, right? So again, these are data points. These are things that you know that you can collect information on that's important, that you should acknowledge. There's also community events, news, social media, A lot of times there's going to be community facing documents that nonprofits are going to put out about the work that they do. They want people to know the good work they're doing. They want the acknowledgement. They want people to understand their metrics, their understandings, their clientele, right? These are all available to you, mostly, on their website, right? Websites are a treasure trove of information. Annual reports are another one that can be really important. Annual reports were my favorite to collect information about individual nonprofits. It helped give me a sense of the work that they do, how they treat their clientele, how they treat their staff, how they call out donors. All of these things are important to understand how these nonprofits operate. The other thing I loved, and this wasn't always a given, but if they had a nonprofit strategic plan, I would ask for one, because I think it was really important not only to know what I knew about the nonprofit, but where do they want to go? What's their aspirations? What are they trying to do? Not just what are they doing now, what are they trying to do? So again, all of these are data points that you could be collecting that you can understand. And that's just that first bullet here. All those things I just talked about, we're still just talking about data I'm collecting from nonprofits that just deals with the nonprofit themselves before they even apply to me, okay? Now, the second one's pretty obvious. The LOI or application, whatever form or format that you do, whether you do an intake phone call, whether you do a broad letter of inquiry to kind of cast a wide net, whether you do a very formal grant application, all of these are data points that obviously you can be collecting as well. The third piece here, I think, is important, and we're going to come back to this a little bit later on, because I feel like this is a very underrated version of community foundations and what we do with this with internal evaluation. So collecting data internally. How do your evaluators rank initial proposals? Do you ever go back 3 years from now after the grant is done and you go, wow, I really thought that would be a slam dunk, but it wasn't? What made it seem like it was a slam dunk 3 years ago? I always love asking that question to my clients. And sometimes they go, well, we didn't really believe in this client or this nonprofit that much. And we went back and we saw how we ranked it, but then they knocked it out of the park. Why? Ask yourself why. I always find that to be the most interesting question when we're looking at data. Ask yourself why. And you're going to hear this word a lot from me, is analytics and analyze. Figure it out. Look at your trends. Look at where do you see things trending? Where do you see patterns? And this both is going to be an external thing of what other nonprofits are doing, and what are you doing internally that is making you successful or not successful, right? So it's also a very interesting point of view for me. Number 4 bullet full here is interim or post-grant reports. This would be like your check-in reports, or, hey, the program was finished a year ago. What have we done since, or what has the program achieved? And if you're a Foundant client, we call these follow-up forms. This is basically anything you collect from your grantee post-decision. So after you say, yes, here's your money, what else are you collecting from the grantee, if anything, right? And you might choose not to collect anything, and that's also valid. But a lot of people will collect something, right? Just to say, hey, how successful was this grant? Okay. Site visits. This is an interesting one because COVID really threw a wrench in all of our plans here with site visits. I feel like a lot of people were starting to get more interested in site visits instead of having people fill out forms and going through that formality. A site visit is still work for nonprofits. They still have to kind of get ready for you and prep things for you. However, it's a little less pressure. It can be as formal or as informal as you want. You take your own notes. Again, we talked about those senses with your own observational power. That can sometimes be very strong. I remember going to a pep rally at a local high school for a teen empowerment summit, and it was one of the most powerful presentations I've ever witnessed in my life. So again, those can be very impactful as far as you assessing how you're doing as a grant maker and the work that you're doing in your community. Okay. The last piece here is that program surveys and reports. Now, this is an interesting one to me. This would be more if, like, as part of the grant program or as part of just the program in general, if the grantee surveyed the clients or the people served, you could ask to see those surveys. You could say, I would like to see the raw copies. I don't just want the top sheet. I would like to, like, if you happen to have them and it's not too much trouble to make photocopies, or even if I can come in and take a look at them, that shows you, again, we're going to talk about this a lot, both qualitative and quantitative feedback. And this is directly from the people served. It's not from the grantee receiving money. It's directly from the people served. And again, I know I keep saying this, we're going to come back to that point too. I feel like there's some key trends here, even on this own call. As I was prepping for it, I was like, wow, I'm saying the same thing over and over again. And there's a reason for that. I think these are the key pieces of this presentation and data, right? I'll give you I like to do a lot of anecdotes in case you haven't noticed. When I was a fundraiser and writing grants for a living, we did a teen empowerment summit of our own, and I submitted our surveys from the teens to a funder, and it was a teen empowerment summit that helped vulnerable teenagers feel more confident and empowered in their personal lives. And there was this very shy little guy who at the end of the summit felt he submitted his survey saying that he saw himself as Batman and that he had a Gotham to save. And I literally submitted that survey to the funder, and the funder was just like, this is delightful. That's so wonderful. And again, it's more that qualitative, like, it's one person served, but if you can change that person's outlook on life, like, you're doing good work, you're doing something right? So it just adds some kind of commentary on the work that you do that is just, it can be impactful. You just never know what will be impactful until you kind of look at that data and see what it says. So. All right, we are gonna, by the way, sorry, and I'm a little all over the place today. Lots of lots of side notes, lots of all these things. I will pause for questions. So if you do have questions, please make a note of it, jot it down. We're gonna pause it a little bit for breakout rooms, but before we do that, I can take some questions, and I'll take some questions at the end as well. So if you have any questions on anything I'm saying at all, please just make a note and we'll get to it, I promise. Okay. All right. Best practices. Let's talk about data collection and best practices. So again, I've been doing this about 4 years on the Foundant side of the house. I often will have clients that will ask me, what should I collect? And I call that the $20,000 question, because here in the US, you can literally hire consultants who will charge you $20,000 and tell you what to collect. And my joke is, I'm your $20,000 consultant who's free. I will tell you, collect something. Like, don't pay me $20,000 to tell you this. Just collect something, right? And just start somewhere. That's always my advice to folks who feel like, oh, I don't know what to collect. I know I'm supposed to collect something, but what do I do? And I just say, start somewhere, right? And be creative, okay? Like, there's two kind of ways of the house that you could go about deciding this. There's two options for you. The first is to predetermine. Predetermine is, what data do you want your nonprofits to collect? And just decide for them. I want you to collect the number of kids who improve test scores in school. That's a good example of predetermining, okay? The nice thing about predetermining is you can aggregate that data across your grant programs. You can see what interventions test better and do well, and you can figure out what's the secret sauce of those programs that are doing really, really well, and ask other people to replicate that, or give more money to the people who are doing well with that, okay? So that's the pro there. You have a common data metric, and you're able to analyze across grant programs the efficacy of these interventions. The other side of the house is to not predetermine, and then you allow grantees to create their own evaluation criteria to measure their own success, okay? This is what 98% of my clients do. Nothing wrong with it. It's just, it's harder to look at your impact across a sector and say, this is what we've been able to do, because it's not apples to apples anymore. It's now apples, oranges, bananas, and every other fruit, right? If you go this route where you're allowing people to create their own measures of success, You may want to think about how you will evaluate success for that particular grant program. Maybe it's a ranking scale. Maybe it's how much that program aligns with your focus area. Maybe it's how much it aligns with community needs. Maybe it's how much it aligns with academic data. That's the most recent academic data to come out saying this is a social determinant of health. If we decrease this, it will increase test scores, right? So there's a lot of different things you can do here. The big thing here is and again, this is why I have in my parentheses here, be creative, okay? And allow your grantees to be creative. I'll give you another little fun fact about creativity. There is an orchestra in Ohio. I read an article a couple years ago about this. They measured their success in the number of standing ovations that they received because that was something that was important to them. They said, we want invites to high prestige European festivals, and we want more standing ovations than we got last year. Those were two things that were really important to them. They got a lot of different grant money for those two simple things, right? So don't necessarily feel like you need to pigeonhole your grantees into, a very specific corner. Allow them to be creative if that's something that you feel is a good idea too, right? So again, I always tell people, collect something and start somewhere, okay? Now, I say this and I'm going to get on my soapbox here and I'm about to contradict my own soapbox. So get ready, friends. But let's start with my soapbox first. My soapbox start is consistency, okay? I can't tell you how many times my clients say, here, I'm done my grant application, everything's good. And then 3 months in, they say, well, my board wants me to change what I'm collecting. And I always say, you can blame it on EC if you want. EC can say no. You can say EC at Foundant says no. Just pick a time frame and just allow yourself the fidelity to that time frame to collect the data. And this often will conflict with what a VP wants, what an executive member wants, what a board member wants, what a volunteer wants, right? This will often conflict. That's okay. But it's really important that we stay consistent when we're collecting data. Otherwise, now, if you're switching halfway through a grant cycle, you're switching 3 months into a grant cycle, that data isn't useful anymore. You're now collecting two different sets of data. The 20 people who applied before and the 20 people who applied after, you no longer have a consistent cohort. So it's not very useful at all. Again, if you guys ever need to say EC at Foundant says no, I will allow it. So that's fine. You can tell them to call me and I'll be like, nope, EC says so. Okay. Now, here's where I'm going to contradict myself. While consistency is key and important, you also are required to have flexibility. Okay. Now, I say this not contradicting what I just said about like a cohort. However, more so reevaluating your data collection points every once in a while is never a bad thing. In fact, you should be doing it. Okay. I say this because you will most certainly ask yourself 30 years from now, what was I thinking? Why did I have people collect this data? I don't understand why I did that, but here I am. I did it. That's okay. That's common. Okay. You're working to change people's lives. Their needs are going to change. That's why you're a community foundation. You change with the needs of your community. Okay. Change is going to come as time moves on and as circumstance goes on. You have to make sure that data is still relevant 30 years from now. And if it's not, ditch it. Collect something else. Okay. Always put your ear to the ground and figure out, is what I'm collecting still relevant? Is it helpful in guiding me in my work? Yes or no? Okay. I also, again, that kind of nicely segues me into my last point, is that use it or lose it, right? The last thing I want to hear is when I tell clients, I say, why are we collecting this? What do you need this for? I normally will get the answer, well, that's what we've always done. I hate that answer. It's a bad answer. Okay. Now, if it's what you've always done and there's a reason for it, that's fine. If it's what you've always done, but literally you just collect it and it sits on a shelf, that's not a good answer. Okay, so just really challenge that mentality if you can, and really try to bring people on board with you on why collecting relevant data is going to be really important for you in your work, especially again, when you're trying to change people's lives. Okay. Alrighty, let's go to the next one. Data and time. Okay, so I talked about this a little bit about not changing up your mind 3 months in. On what you're trying to collect. So data and time definitely has a love-hate relationship, especially in my world, probably in your worlds too, I'm assuming. But really, the questions I like to ask myself when I think about this topic is, how do you decide what to collect? What does success look like in how you collect it? How do you store tons of data? Do you put coding practices in place so it's easier to find data you need? Right? These are all really good questions. They're broad questions, but they're important questions. So this all deals with like kind of the logistics of collecting this data over time. Just make sure whatever system you're using, it can be Excel, it could be a piece of paper, it could be a notebook pad that you're writing down on. I don't necessarily endorse that, but heck, if it works for you, it works for you. Just make sure whatever system you use, make sure you have some type of reporting or filter capability so that you can find what you need. The reason I say that is the more data you collect over time, the more that data will quickly overwhelm you. You're gonna need some type of search functionality, export functionality, filter functionality, so that if your boss says, get me a list of A, B, C, D, E, F, G, you can get A, B, C, D, E, F, G, but exclude everything from H on, right? So you don't want tons and tons and tons and tons of data. You just want the thing you need to look at. So whatever system you're using or whatever protocols you put in place, just make sure you have some type of something that will allow you to kind of sift through the things you need without kind of feeling like, oh boy, I need a vacation stat. So just keep that in mind. That brings me to protocols, policies, procedures. So I just talked a little bit about coding, about how you can code data to make it easier to sift through. Protocols are very, very important, especially if you have multiple people working on a data collection project. You might be in different departments using the same software. You might be just one department, but you've got 3 program officers or 3 analysts. It's not going to be useful if everybody is doing their own thing. So make sure everyone is on the same page as far as establishing data protocols, policies, procedures. Very true story. I had someone I worked on with a team who insisted on writing out the word street, not ST. And then another person put ST period, and another person put ST capitals, then period. They all fought. The 3 of them fought every day. And it was just, if someone could just make a decision about how this should be entered, nobody would be fighting right now, right? So it's just that type of, like, I hate to say it, knucklehead stuff that it just needs to be decided upon. Like, you know, hash it out and decide, and then everybody moves forward together with the same understanding of how a shared system and shared data collection policy should work. Okay. Okay. Next piece, data points that correlate with focus areas and outcomes. Again, I'm going to use more grants examples in this, but again, finance, marketing, development folks, this definitely correlates with your alley as well. You should be collecting data that focus on, or that align with your focus areas or outcomes or what you're trying to achieve. Okay. My grants example is you might have an application that is a fantastic grant program, but if it doesn't align with what you're trying to achieve, it's maybe not the best fit and maybe you shouldn't fund it, right? It's not saying it's not a good program. It's just using fidelity to what you said you're going to fund. If your funding areas are these 3 areas, and this application that comes in, that's a wonderful little application about animal welfare, but you're not funding animal welfare, you have to make sure that the goals of the grant programs are aligning with what you're trying to do in your work. Okay. All my non-grants people, I'll try to give you an example as well. Think about it this way. What data do you collect to measure your own team's KPIs or key performance indicators, right? It should be, again, the data that you collect aligned with that.
Ben, ils ont réussi à le rouler jusque-là. Non,
someone-
non, non, non.
Can someone mute themselves? I'm sorry. We can hear you. Okay. There we go. I'll give you another good example of this. My husband's in human resources, and he was wondering how his company's IT department could better understand how effective their cybersecurity training was at Foundant. Jen's here. I see her now. So hi, Jen. She knows this. We at Foundant, we do short educational videos that are actually very fun. But at the end of every video, there are 2 questions that are asked. The first is, was this training helpful for you to understand how best to protect the company? And it's a 1 through 5 scale. The second question is, was this training helpful in helping you understand how to protect you and your family's online presence, from a 1 to 5 scale? Okay. It's a simple qualitative kind of, but also quantitative in that way, feedback. And my password is now 15 characters long, and my husband yells at me because he never remembers my password, but I'm like, but my IT guys are going to be really proud of me here at Foundant. So, so again, you can be creative. You don't have to be pigeonholed. You can decide what these things mean to you in the work that you're doing. And these are the key data collection pieces that you're collecting to better evaluate how you're doing in your work. Okay. All right, there's that quantitative versus qualitative again. We're going to dive in. All right. Really, when it comes to this, again, when it deals with time, data and time, is who needs what, when, and how it relates to time. So again, I'll give you good examples. You might be using the same data points, but other people might be using it differently. And they might be using it in the way that they need it to, and you might be using it the way you need it to. There's nothing wrong with that. That's in fact what you should be doing, because it simplifies it for the applicant, and you still get what you need out of it from 2 different departments across your own community foundation. Okay. So again, examples, because this is the best way I know how to convey this. As far as number of people served for a program, that was good to know from a grants funding perspective, but it wasn't always like our decision maker. It wasn't always, oh, this is a $5,000 grant ask to serve 100 people. Great, let's fund that. It actually was used more from a how expensive on a per person per specific intervention is it? So for example, we had a $5,000 grant that only served 10 people, but those 10 people literally got out of poverty. It's a pretty good use of our $5,000 for 10 people to get out of poverty. Okay, so that's how we use it more on the grant side of the house, as far as a calculation of what is the investment going to return for us. Okay, now the flip side of that is our marketing team. They needed our numbers served, for our total numbers served by our programs for our annual report. Okay, so again, we might be using the same data point, but just in 2 entirely different ways. And guess what? That serves us both just fine. Okay, so I encourage you to think about that, because the other thing we're going to talk about here in just a bit is understanding what you're asking and how you're asking it, and if that question serves you well. As many times as you can, if you can ask the same question to get multiple people within your own community foundation data, do that, because it's 1 less question for an applicant or a grantee to answer. Okay, so I encourage you to think about that. Now, the other thing on the flip side of that is you might be collecting something your department might not need, but another department does. So where there is no overlap, but there still may be some value in the question, you're going to need to understand that as well before you start asking questions left and right. One thing we used to collect was success stories on our grant side of the and we would hear these stories of the happy kids and look how great that is. They're doing great these days. The donor services side might need those stories so they can go back to that donor's family to help them understand the impact that their family's contribution is making in our community. That's equally as important as the grant work we're doing as well. We just maybe not be looking at it on our side of the house, even though we're collecting it through the grants department as part of like a report or something for that example. Okay, so it's important to understand all of these needs from a community foundation. Again, we're multifaceted, there's different cross-functional departments. We're all working together for the same cause. It's important to understand what we're asking and why we're asking it and who needs that information. Okay. Now that last piece here, that pick a time frame here, and I got just maybe a slide or two left before we go into a breakout group. So again, keep writing down those questions if you have any questions for me on anything we've chatted about. But that last piece here on this data and time slide is pick a time frame, right? So we talked a little bit about maybe not 3 months in, maybe not halfway through a grant cycle. Your time frame might be a year just to try something to collect. Your time frame might be 5 years. Instead of changing those things mid-cycle or before that time frame that you've kind of selected, just really commit to it if you can. You can always review what you're collecting and how you're collecting it at the end of the time frame if changes should be made. But again, if you're trying to serve, fidelity to the decisions that were made, it's helpful to do that after that, committing, doing what you've committed to. And also just make sure grantees are aware of those timeframes as well. I'll give you, this is less of a poignant example and more of just a broad stroke example, but a lot of times if you're dealing collective impact or multi-prong, multi-year grants, where it's a 5-year grant program, change may not come in a year. The needle might not move in a year. It might move in 5 years. And they told you that in the beginning, and you've got to be okay with that. You got to give them the 5 years. It's going to look like progress is slow, because guess what? Progress is slow, especially for these very intricate, balled up, intertwined, social determinants of health kind of situation. It's going to take a while to pry these barriers back and to have these multi-pronged interventions in order for progress to be made. So some of this just takes patience. But again, if after 5 years, the needle has not moved, maybe that's when you reassess after you've kind of committed to that time frame initially. So lots of things to just little nuggets to think about and to kind of noodle on for you. Okay. All right, I think this is my last slide before we do a breakout session. And I'll take some questions before we do that. But let's talk about how we use data. And again, I mentioned this earlier, you're going to hear the word analyze a lot from me, analysis and analyze, right? I don't want us to just collect data for it to sit on a shelf. I want us to look at the data, right? How do we actually use it? I don't want it to never be touched again. I want us to look at it. This includes observation, trends, patterns, interventions, efficacy, right? I want you to look at the stuff, right? And I did this at 24, right? I didn't know what I was doing, but I was like, you know what? I don't know. I can read, I have a brain. I can look at things and try to put pieces together. If you want to hire a consultant who does know what they're doing, you can certainly do that as well. But I promise you, once you actually have all the data in one place, because that's the hardest part, get all the data in one place. That's the hardest part, because typically it's like a piece lives over here in Donna's brain and a piece lives over here in Layla's brain. And then Elise has her 4-page summary, and then there's a different 4-page summary that's over here, right? So once you have all the data together, start looking at it. What do you see? What do you observe? Is there a common thread here where there's, we keep trying to partner with this one school and the school doesn't seem very receptive? Does that just mean we just switch schools? We try a different pilot school to, try these programs over there to see if we fare better, right? It could just be as simple as that. So really take a look at what you're doing and how efficient that the programs that you're funding have been. And again, this includes my non-grants people. Look at the data that you're collecting and try to best understand what that data is trying to tell you. Big thing here, that's my sub bullet here, document. Okay, if you leave because you win the lotto and you move to Tahiti next year, the person who comes in behind you should try to learn what you've already learned a year ago. Okay, document everything that you're seeing. Okay. Next piece of this is, what do you do with the data fields that aren't giving you the information you need it to give you? Okay, I say there's a 2-part question to this, and you can read them here. First part, does the grantee not understand the question? Do they just simply not understand the difference between an output and an outcome, a method of measurement versus an indicator? Do they just not understand? in which case you just need to educate them, or maybe provide more inline instructions, or have an education session, or hire a consultant to help you help them. Or does the question not really matter, right? So look at that question. If it's not giving you fruitful info, is it just because not only who cares if the grantee understands it or not, it's a question you don't really need an answer to, okay? Those are two really important questions. And there's action items on both of those. The first is to better flesh out the question for bullet point number 1. Bullet point number 2 is, you guessed it, use it or lose it, ditch it. Okay. Other ways that you can use data is tell the community, tell your stakeholders, tell your board members, your volunteers, your committees, your higher ups, your interns, your students who help you out from time to time, just your overall general community. Now, if you decide to do that, you have to understand, how do you present it to the community? Do you release the 40-page data summary that you've just spent a year and a half collecting? Probably not. Maybe just the top sheet, maybe an infographic, maybe use visual aids, maybe bar graph, maybe a line graph, right? Figure out different ways of presenting data. And this is a piece we'll come back to as well. But it's important that if we're looking at it with the analysis brain of what's this data telling us, if we're trying to flip that to make it external, to say this is what this data is saying, what's the best modality in which we could do that? What's the best way we can explain this to our community? Okay. All right, I think this is our breakout session. Yeah, okay. So I'll pause here for a minute. We are, and CFC folks, remind me if I'm wrong. I think, are we doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different breakout rooms?
Yes, we're going to be doing 5, and everyone should have an invitation on their screen to join one breakout room shortly. And I populated the questions in the chat.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Kaltun. I appreciate that. So yeah, you can read these 5 here. These are the breakout rooms that we're going to kind of pop into. We're going to spend, I think, like 10, 15 minutes maybe in them. And just, I'd encourage you all to talk to each other about this stuff. Think about the things that I've said, but also just really reflect on the data practices that you've done yourself. Interact with each other. I always tell people, I love Foundation so much because we're so willing to share with each other. It's not a competition. We're very like, hey, what do you do? This is what we do. How does that work for you? Can I steal that from you? And 9 times out of 10, the answer is yes. So I encourage you to have these really wonderful conversations with each other. Before we do breakouts, are there any big questions for me? And I know I do see things in the chat, but I haven't been following, if I'm honest, because I've been doing this and my cat's deciding to join me now. Any questions for me that I can help you all with? If not, that's okay. Just thought I'd ask.
Well, I do have a question, but it's a big one, and it's Victoria Gibb-Parsley from the Perth and District Community Foundation, small town in Eastern Ontario, and it's a very small foundation, and I'm a part-time employee there, using Foundant though, and curious, I don't think it's going to be this webinar, but really curious about how Foundant can be used as a tool around managing that data that you're talking about, because there are notes, there are addresses, there's grantees, there's so many layers, and I'm just starting to sort it out. I'm brand new to the job, but I'm really curious. Sure. I'd love another webinar on like how Foundant specifically can be used around data collection and sorting and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a great question, Victoria. Jen, feel free to jump in and yell at me if I'm saying something I'm not supposed to. But I will tell you, Victoria, one of the things that we're doing here at Foundant that I don't think it's a secret. We're working on integrating our products into one reporting tool. So no matter if you have GLM, SLM, or C-suite, you log on to, right, you log on to foundant.com and then you say, I want this, and this to come together and pull me into one report. And it can come from any of our 3 products. We're a ways off from it, to be fair. So don't expect this like tomorrow. But that's one of the things we're really thinking about. And we're also thinking about doing that regionally. So if you wanted to work regionally within funders in Ontario, for example, that's something we're kind of we're interested in like researching what that looks like more and how that works with like how people look at their own data, how you want to approach it from a regional perspective, from a community health perspective. You know, we're in the research phase now of just understanding what we, you know, asking the questions we don't know, just so that we can understand better. But we are interested in aggregating, making it easier to at least to aggregate that data for you, so that again, this is all compiled, but then you have everything you need to say, these are the decisions I need to make based on what this data is telling me.
And
Okay, yeah.
We've had some folks jump in and just ask about Foundant specific sessions, and we do have user groups scheduled from time to time and client webinars that are frequently data focused, as you might imagine. So we don't want to kind of derail the bigger picture conversation today, but know that those options are out there, and we're happy to answer any more questions with our contact information after today's event.
Thank you so much.
Sure thing. Thanks for asking.
So I'll open all the breakout rooms now, you see, that's okay.
Sounds good. We're gonna cover some things he has some questions about. So I'm gonna throw some more examples in, which is fun. But that was really good. Hopefully you all found that fruitful. Just being able to connect with each other. Again, this is like one of my favorite things about the funding community is like, we're not competing. We're all here to do the same thing, just in our own different places in the world, right? So I'm a big proponent of steal like steal what you should steal. Don't steal things you shouldn't steal, but steal things that people say it's okay to steal. I used to literally Google follow-up forum good language about how to get grantees to stop just sucking up and like tell you how it actually went. And I got some really good examples. So yeah, I'm a big proponent of that. So anyway, well, any other questions for me before we dive back into the presentation? And I think we might have some room. Keltoon, remind me. I think we're going to have another breakout session maybe at the end. Does that sound right?
We have it till 2:20, so we'll have some room for questions after your presentation.
Got it. Okay, that's good. Cool. All right, let me share my screen. Let's do this again. Hopefully it works. Can I get nods? Do we see screens? Cool. I see nods. Very good. All right, I'm going to kind of breeze through this because I've got kind of a few slides here. Okay, so we're going to talk about the data burden, everybody. We just talked about this in my breakout room. You guys know this. If you've ever been a grant writer, ever, volunteer, paid, or otherwise, if you've ever written a grant before, you know what I mean. We used to call these war stories in the grant community, where it's a $5,000 grant that requires 4 interim reports, a site visit, a post-grant report, and basically all of your time. Just keep in mind that the more that you ask nonprofits to spend time on grant administration, that's more time that they're not focusing on their program that you yourself have funded, right? So there is kind of this delicate balance of the universe of like, how do I get the things that I need, but how do I also like give grace to my nonprofits who are doing this really hard work that it tires people out. I mean, I did that work for 7 years and I was like, I can't do it anymore. Like it's a burnout profession for a reason. It is hard, heavy work. However, you still need something to evaluate how effective your grant making strategies are. So there has to be a balance. Think about the following things that you ask your grantees. What's need to know versus what's nice to know? What's required versus what's optional? What modalities are you going to make happen? Do you want a physical form that you can physically pull into a report to report on? Do you want to make a phone call and you ask them these questions? You have a really informal conversation and then maybe you type up your own notes that answers your own questions that you might have about that grant. That is the way the world seems to be going, is phone calls and site visits, which tends to be a little more informal than necessarily like a very strategic form that people freak out about and, oh, it's due September 30th. If I don't have it in September 30th, then I'll never get a grant from them again, right? There is a power dynamic there that we just need to acknowledge. So that does seem to be more the way the world is going is more phone calls and site visits. And really, again, think about your tone and even how you have those phone calls. Hey, how are things going? What are your challenges? How can I help? Right? You're there to be a resource for your nonprofits, and you're there to better understand their challenges so that it helps you be a better grant maker in the future, right? So everybody wins in that scenario. It's a different tone than a formal form. And your bonus is you get, relationship building with your grantees, which means you start establishing trust, which means when they come to you and say, this school is being a problematic partner. They said they would do ABC. They did none of ABC, which means we had to do ABC. Maybe that means we find a different school for you to pilot the next program in, right? And that's okay. We need to know these things as funders, right? We need to understand their challenges so we can help them troubleshoot for next time. Again, I think just even acknowledging that goes a long way with nonprofits. I feel like they feel seen the minute you say that, the minute you're like, I'm here as an ally, I'm here to help you. I'm here to I'm not here to take the money back. I don't want the money back. I want you to have the money and I want you to be successful. Tell me how I can help you be successful. If you're ever dealing with a lack of knowledge, right? So you're getting reports back or you're getting answers that are not what you're trying to hear, or maybe they're not understanding what you're asking, think about technical assistance. I always tell people we can't save the world with money alone, because guess what? There's always going to be more money in asks than there is money to give out. What you can do is technical assistance. Can you sit down with a grantee and tell them exactly what you're looking for? Ask them about a program they're seeking money for. Try to maybe match make it with either a fund at your foundation, or guess what? You've got a really good relationship with the funder down the street. Maybe you set them up with that. It goes a long way in the long run, okay? Other folks, I literally will have people who give out a monetary award and they'll tack on an additional $1,000 so that the nonprofit can hire a program consultant to do evaluation data collection, professional evaluation data collection, and tell them exactly what to do, how to collect it, and pay for software to help them collect the data that they need, right? So instead of them physically having to be at every program counting heads, maybe it's a badge swipe, right? Like, technology is here, people. Like, it's here to help, and we want our nonprofits to be delivering the grant program, not working on grant administration. So as much as you can brainstorm on how to get them out of that headspace, but still getting you what you need, that's your perfect storm of like, great grant, do it again next year kind of a thing. Okay, now I'm going to talk a little bit about evaluating yourself, just because I've talked a lot about external focused, nonprofit focused, grantee focused. I think it's really important that when we're thinking about data is not just external facing, it's also internal facing, but also I'd be remiss to say you got to also evaluate how you're doing as a grant maker, how you're doing as a funder. And not just you, but all internal stakeholders should be involved. If your board is not asking you this question, you need to be asking your board why they're not asking this question. How effective are you as a grant maker? And how are you quantifying it? Okay, so really this looks at evaluating your grant making strategies. You're balancing your stakeholder needs, all your internal and external. You're using documented learning, right? So we're learning those patterns of analysis and we're learning along our way of doing things. It doesn't mean you have to have it all figured out right now. It just means you have to be asking these questions now so that you can document these answers as you go through, right? And again, things will change. 5 years from now, you're going to go, well, that didn't work, and you're going to pivot. And guess what? That's a good example of internal learning. Okay. You also need to ask yourself what has worked and what has not worked and why. And what are we pivoting to? What data supports how we're pivoting to different community needs? You have to look at your different learning modalities or training. I did my undergrad in education, and there's different ways people learn. So maybe you learn because you're a visual person, but maybe your boss learns and they're an audio person, audio, they learn from audio or whatever. Maybe there's maybe more people are introverted, more other people are extroverted, right? So it all deals with learning to different learning styles and how you collect data and how you present data to those learning styles is actually important in kind of bringing people along on that journey with you. Okay. The funder grantee relationships I touched on a little bit about. I really am a big believer in this. I mentioned this earlier in my breakout session, but we had an example we had an education initiative. We talked to superintendents, but we didn't talk to teachers. And when we talked to teachers, we learned that, oh, there's a disconnect in talking to superintendents versus talking to teachers about two very different things within the education sector, right? So it's important you're talking to all people and you're listening to all people. And I think what's really, really important is talking to the people that the programs serve. Again, going to give you another good example. We had a downtown revitalization initiative at my foundation. And one of the lowest poorly ranked projects that likely would not have gotten funding was to basically bulldoze a dilapidated building in a neighborhood in one of the poorest parts of New York City. And my boss and I decided, let's take a walk. Let's go take a look at it. So we're kind of just casually talking about it, saying, oh, it doesn't look great. One of the residents happened to be walking behind us and said, please tear it down. It is a blight. My kids try to go in there. I'm terrified it's going to fall on my child. And it was just, again, very meaningful and impactful to hear the people served by this project really believe in it. There's a stake in this that is impacting the people served. Okay. So make sure that you at least, expand your horizons and who you're talking to when it comes to relationships. Okay. And again, that last piece is always just make sure you're revisiting your evaluation criteria. I mentioned that before of how you're selecting projects. Just make sure you're looking at that from time to time and going back and saying, this one we thought was going to be awesome, wasn't so great. Why did we think it was going to be awesome? And this other one that was kind of bleh ended up being a great grant. What made it a great grant? And again, you're going to find patterns and things that you can learn from your own decision making and your own internal conversations that is going to make you a better grant maker in the long run. Okay. Okay. This one, I might kind of fly through this one because I do want to make sure, I know we only have a couple more minutes, but just make sure that you're looking at all of these various types of reporting. We've got impact, financial, qualitative, contact reporting that deals with that relationship side, the sort of CRM side of the house, making sure you're understanding who you're talking to. Who you're not talking to is also a really interesting thing to look at, as far as getting a list of all your nonprofits in your area. Who do you have relationships with? Who are the big 10 who you always give money to? Who are the ones you never give money to, but they always apply? What are they doing wrong? I always find these data points interesting and looking back on those things. But then also looking at how are you reporting and sharing on some of this information? Now, some of this information deserves to be internal only. It's meant to be a metric for yourself on how you're moving the needle. Some of this should be external and how you're sharing this with the community. Okay. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jen, I'm pretty sure we have these slides over to CFC, so these slides should be available as well. Okay, I'm seeing nods, cool. I do want to just make sure we get to this piece as well, because I always dislike going to webinars where I'm like, well, I got nothing out of that. So I'm hoping you guys have something to come away with from this webinar and at least getting you kickstarted into thinking about some of these things. But here are some very real things you could be doing like now, right? The first is perform a data audit. This can be as expensive as hiring a consultant or as simple as having a staff or department-wide conversation. You could even hire a summer intern to come in here and just say, go survey every head of every department about what data we collect and put it in one place. And I'd just be curious how much overlap you have between finance and development and grants and operations and IT. I'd be very curious to see what that looks like, okay? Again, I'm a big proponent of steal what can be stolen. Ask, what do community foundations collect? We've got a really robust community here at Foundant, and you do not need to be a Foundant customer to use it. It's called Compass. It's a Compass, our online community. But basically, just throw some discussions out there saying, what data do you collect and how best do you collect it, right? I guarantee you other funders will jump in and weigh in and tell you what they're collecting, right? And how they're doing it. I do have a sub bullet here is understand scalability. I looked a lot at the Gates Foundation when I was working at my community foundation, and I'm like, well, I don't have 8 million, bajillion, gazillion, trillion dollars, so I probably can't do as much as the Gates Foundation. But there's some good ideas when it comes to ABC that I could do at a wide level. So I'm going to try that. Okay. Research kind of dives in nicely with Steele, with other foundations are doing. Again, try something. Don't do nothing. Just try something. Have a data initial write-up policy that you want to just try. Try collecting some initial data points just to get you going and get you kick-started. Biggest thing here that I'm going to really point at, and you can't see me, and I realize webinars are bad for this, but I'm pointing at this bullet point, I promise you, is survey your grantees and applicants. This will go a huge way of establishing trust with your grantees and your end users, your applicants. We did this with my old foundation, and overwhelmingly, they were like, we hate your budget template. Your budget template is stupid. We have our own. We hate having to reinvent our budget template every single time we apply for a funder. So I kind of turned to all my program officers and I'm like, do we care that much about our budget template? And every single one of them said no. I announced it at our next informational meeting. 80 people in the room cheered, literally cheered for me. And I was like, all I did was get rid of a template. And they were like, you don't understand how much time this saves. And I was like, I had no idea. Never would have been able to do that unless I asked them. So talk to the people you're serving who are serving others is a big point there. Really quick, I know we only have like a minute. Talk to your leadership and board about your expectations of data collection, right? Have a larger conversation around your leadership, around what you're trying to do and the movement you're trying to start. Again, if you need to say EC from Foundant says, no, we can't switch what we're trying to collect 3 months in, I'll allow it. You can have them call me. Dashboard is important. Somebody asked a question earlier about Foundant and what we're trying to do. Dashboarding is going to be very important in our future product solutions very shortly. Like, it's coming. We need it. You need to be able to digest lots and lots of data into a visible visual aid. So that's going to be more important to communicate some of that data. Making sure your data is usable, just making sure it's, consistent for the most part. And if you're making changes, you're documenting why you make changes. And then the last piece of this, again, really quick, is if you can compile all of this that you, and I know it's overwhelming right now, but compile all of this and take a day out of the office. Just take a day, go with your department, go sit in a coffee shop, go sit on somebody's comfy couch and just look at it. Have a retreat. You can't do this at your desk, I promise you. You can't even do it at your home desk. I would say, like, completely remove yourself from work and look at all of this stuff. So give yourself some space and some grace to let yourself look at some of these things. I think that's almost the more important piece of this, is like giving yourself some headspace to kind of process all of this stuff. So, okay. Well, we did have some breakout sessions, although I know, again, we're like butting up against time, but this is my email address. I'd be curious if you guys have any feedback or any questions for me at all. Feel free to take this down. Feel free to shoot me a line. That's fine. Anything else, CFC folks, or any time for questions at all, or it's up to you.
Thank you so much, EC. I'm really mindful of the time and where we're sitting. Would love for anyone to connect with either Kaltun, myself, or yourself directly. I am very intrigued after today's webinar. I want to share with you my deep appreciation, EC, for your care, your passion, and your willingness to share your learnings and your experiences with this broad sector of community foundations that have joined us today. This webinar, as we know, is recorded, and we will be providing a copy of the webinar with our attendees, but also posting a copy on our website. And as I reflect on today's session, there was a couple key nuggets. There was many nuggets. My gosh, I do share. There were many nuggets that you shared with us, EC, but you really articulated well that data is a tool that we can all use, and we can use it to inform all of our work. And that includes from our programs, our impact, but the importance of really analyzing our data and observing what we're doing with it. And what is that data telling us? And how can we use it to tell some amazing stories? I was really mindful when you said data burden. That really resonated with me. And I thank you for sharing that. Because how can we use our data to do our work differently? How can we be a better grant maker? How can we enhance our trust? How can we continue to work with our grantees in the community as we evaluate and look at what we have for data? So really appreciate your thoughts today, EC. Really appreciate your voice. Really appreciate that you have shared with us to also listen about the voices we're not hearing as we look at our data. I also want to express my deep appreciation to Jen and the Foundant team for the ongoing support of the Community Foundation Network from coast to coast to coast in this beautiful country. It is through your support that we're able to continue to grow our network and to continue to develop as a network. And so as we get ready to depart today, deep appreciation also to all of our attendees. Thank you so much for joining us. We are extremely grateful for your dedication to strengthen your organization as well as your community. I encourage everyone to watch our website. We have additional events posted on our website. We also have the Learning Institute newsletter, which will be coming out this week. So do watch for future events and resources posted and on the website or in the newsletter. And as we get ready to depart today, please stay well, everyone. Please stay well. Take time to enjoy this beautiful moment of fall that we are all have as a gift today. And as you go forward today, do take that moment to pause and share gratitude for yourself and the amazing organization you are with. Thank you all. All the best.